Ladies and gentlemen, back with another podcast, and as always, I'm George Mienie, and my objective here is to try and help the automotive industry move forward in South Africa. There's so many things that we've seen overseas that we aren't even doing in South Africa yet, so why not talk about it and try and get the entire industry moving forward. And I'm fortunate today to be joined by the one and only Mike Mabasa, who is the CEO of NAAMSA. And if you don't know what NAAMSA stands for, it's the National Automobile Manufacturers Association of South Africa. Did I get that right, Mike? And welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. 10 out of 10.
10 out of 10. 10 out of 10. So, before we get into the actual submissions to government and the gazetted documents, how has COVID-19 been treating you, your team from NAAMSA, and how have you guys got along?
Well, look, I think this is a new normal. It's something that we are all not used to. We had to adapt to new ways of working, new ways of interacting, new ways of doing business. And particularly for us, because we work in an industry where you're representing others, you're representing big businesses, you're representing very big interests in the country. And you've got to keep in touch and connected with people almost on a regular basis. And, in the absence of having to, go to the office with obviously a very clearly defined infrastructure there, you obviously have to then come home and do your own makeshift office here. And so that you're not out of touch, you can still be able to do what you need to do. So it has been tough, but we had to make the best out of the situation because, we understand the importance of staying home and making sure that we're able to reduce the rate of infection and the risk of infection of the COVID-19. So we had to adjust, and we have adjusted.
Well, it looks to me like you've adjusted. So, I think everybody's done a stellar job to take this on board. It's been tough, like you say, but it's been a good learning. There's a lot of positives that I think we can take out of this time and move into the future with. So, getting right into it, Mike. A couple of weeks back, to be a little bit more precise, end of April, government decided to present this risk-adjusted strategy. And with that risk-adjusted strategy came input from organizations and input from the public in order to gazette this document, which I found quite welcoming. I was really glad that the government decided to include business and the public in the drafting of this document. But then, to our surprise, first of all, it was welcome that we could move car sales and OEM manufacturing from level 3 to level 4, which was a good thing. And you and I spoke, and your organization, our organization, we both submitted pleas to the government to get OEM manufacturing and vehicle sales from level 3 to level 4. That happened, however. When the document was published, as you know, it was vehicle sales with specific directions. And some dealers tried to open their doors and were abruptly closed. And there was now confusion as to what the specific directions were. So my organization, your organization, went back to the government and said, please, can you make public these specific directions? And these are the reasons why. And a week later or so, we've now had the Government Gazette being published 2 nights ago with the 3-phased approach. So from NAAMSA's perspective, what was that journey? Color in what I've just spoken about in terms of the nuances and the difficulties you faced in going down this road to the point that we're at now.
Well, look, it was a very interesting journey, to say the least. And interesting because, we are all moving into uncharted territory here. We've never transversed, the areas where we are currently at. So what really meant, it really suggested that we needed to think on our feet very quickly. Because when government said, they needed to open up car dealerships under strict regulations or directions, all of us were not clear what those were and what those would look like. So what we did from our side was to obviously, regroup very quickly with some of our key advisors our teams, so that we can be able to think ahead to say, if anything, what is it that we as the industry would like to see in these regulations? We understood, obviously, government's priorities. We understood that they wanted to make sure that the risk of infection is reduced. We also understood that industry needed to do and take certain measures before the dealerships can be open. So we actually preempted government to a very large extent, and we decided to put together our thoughts, to say what is it that we would like to see in the regulations or in the directions that government would issue, and then let's be a devil advocate and share those thoughts with government and say to them, here is a blueprint from our perspective, and would you be comfortable with what we are proposing, or can you work at least using this document as the basis upon which you can then be able to develop the directives and so on. And we're very, very lucky, in fact, by taking that strategy and that approach, because I can confirm that almost 90% of the things that we had in our original document ended up obviously being used by government as part of the directives that they've issued 2 days ago. So it has been a very interesting journey. We were very clear that we needed to get the dealerships back, because it did not make sense to open up manufacturing plants without dealerships to support them, because manufacturers manufacture vehicles because they've received orders from our dealers in order for them to be able to manufacture these vehicles. So, it didn't make sense to open these massive operations across the country to manufacture vehicles while our dealerships are constrained from doing business. So, and I think, look, every cent and every time, every second we spent in putting together those regulations was worth it. And I think we are very excited that finally we are able to at least get to a place where our dealerships, and in particular our workshops, because our biggest concern was not just only selling cars, but certainly to make sure that the vehicles that are on our roads today continue to be roadworthy, continue to be safe, because there are a lot of people who are working under as essential services personnel, and many of whom their vehicles were already needing servicing and so on. So we're very excited that at least we are able to assist the motorists and every driver who wants their vehicles to be serviced to be able to go back to our service centers and make sure that those vehicles are serviced.
So a very exciting time, as Mike says. And so now we find ourselves with a second government gazetted document that pertains particularly to the automotive industry. And Mike, we've got these 3 phases now that have been gazetted, which then formally allow dealerships to open their doors under specific directions. And these specific directions are: phase 1, 30% of all staff can operate in the dealership, majority of car sales being done remotely, home deliveries of fully sanitized vehicles are mandatory, test drives are by appointment only, and where possible, virtual or electronic signatures. That's phase 1. Phase 2, 60% of staff, and then phase 3, full staff complement by the 8th of June. Now, what the government didn't lay out was whether phase 1 would last 2 weeks, 1 week, 3 weeks. I know there's about 4 weeks to the 8th of June, but what is your sense for the time period here, or is it up to the industry to interpret those time periods?
Well, not necessarily. It's not up to us to interpret the time periods at all. In fact, the time periods have been clarified, and we've subsequently issued, obviously from a NAAMSA perspective, a press release to confirm, those new time periods in relation to how they look like. So, ideally, the first one, as you correctly pointed out, where we have 30%, will run. Obviously, it started obviously when the regulations were published, and that will run up until Saturday, the 23rd of this month, which is next week, Saturday. Phase 2 will run from Monday the 25th, right up until, I think it is almost towards the end of the month. And then phase 3 will then run, from the 8th of June up until the lockdown is actually lifted. So those are very clear, and we are very comfortable that we can be able to work with those timelines going forward.
That's brilliant news. So at least there's more clarity now, as you heard from Mike Mabasa, that the phase 1, phase 2 have some more definition, and then as the president said on his speech last night, that Level 4 might move to Level 3 by the end of the month, which is very good news, which means that Phase 3 will come to an end once Level 4 is lifted. So it looks like the automotive industry is going to be out of this Level 4 lockdown under these specific directions by the end of May. But that remains to be seen, and it depends on the infection rates, obviously. Now, moving to the future, Mike, there are still a couple of unknowns. Some of the unknowns are licensing departments. Licensing departments are not open. There's a lot of questions being asked. What are the next steps, do you believe, with licensing departments? And what is your sense for the actual crux of the problem?
Well, look, I think government is a very big machine. The unfortunate thing is that whether we like it or not, it's a machine also that sometimes does not talk to itself. And we accept, obviously, that when these directions were issued by the Department of Trade and Industry, other departments who are impacted by the regulations were not mobilized as yet in order for them to be able to internalize what the regulations mean and how they will impact on them, to be able to provide support. So the regulations are very clear that the licensing and registration centers must be open. And certainly we are hoping that the Department of Transport will look into those regulations and be able to then go back and revise their own directions. Because you'd recall that Minister Fikile Mbalula did issue his own directions some couple of weeks ago, where he indicated that registration and licensing departments and centers will only open on the 1st of June. So currently, effectively, we've got two conflicting regulations from the same government. And you can't have that. You cannot have two conflicting pieces of legislation because it's causing a lot of confusion in the market. So it's incumbent on government to be able to clarify this confusion. And we've requested, obviously, for that clarity to be made as soon as possible so that we can be able to make sure that licensing departments are open. Because our view, it doesn't make sense to allow dealerships to go back trade while you cannot register the vehicles, because once a customer buys a new car, they would want that vehicle to be registered and licensed immediately so that they can be able to take delivery for their vehicles and get on with life. So if you're going to say to a customer, we can only sell you a car, but come back after 2 weeks for delivery, that's another mission and another crisis we don't want to enter into. We want people to buy their vehicles and take delivery as soon as it is possible, so that we also don't keep stock in our dealerships of vehicles that have already been sold, because we need to create new base for new stock to be able to come in so that we can be able to sell more vehicles to other customers as well.
So I guess, it kind of puts us back into the same situation we were in 2 weeks ago. So dealerships can open, but trading now is questionable, because how do you transfer ownership between now and the 1st of June? Which means, I suppose, that the job of NAAMSA and the job of AutoTrader to try and get our economic cogs moving and our customers trading is not over until this licensing department conundrum is solved. And as you heard from Mike Mabasa, there's two conflicting pieces from the government, one in the Gazette document from the night of the 11th of May, and one by the government from earlier in the month. So it remains to be seen, but I'm sure that the industry is going to be encouraging government to help our dealerships to be able to trade cars. But Mike, what do dealerships do in the interim? Because obviously they can't transfer ownership, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think obviously it's a situation that a very unenviable situation that we find ourselves in, all of us. We obviously want to encourage all our dealerships to continue trading, sell those vehicles, explain the situation that we find ourselves to our customers. And I'm sure our customers are not unreasonable. All we want to do is to make sure that at least we're able to secure, those deals. And we want to encourage, obviously, all our dealerships to secure those deals, sell those vehicles we will definitely register these vehicles. We are working tirelessly around the clock to interact with our colleagues in government so that we can be able to have e-NATES opened, all our licensing and registration centers opened, and also, by the way, obviously our vehicle testing centers as well, because we need those vehicle testing centers as well, particularly for those who are changing ownership of vehicles that are used vehicles from one owner to the next. We need centers like DECRA to be back online as well as soon as possible, so that they can be able to test these vehicles so that we can register them as quickly as we can.
That is a wonderful news. So there you have it. Yes, it's frustrating sometimes, and the cogs turn slowly, but once they spin up, I believe that we will get back to normal. I thank you, Mike Mabasa from NAAMSA for joining me today. Always good to talk to you. Any final words, Mike?
Thanks, George, and thank you very much for inviting me. And I think, look, we want to encourage, obviously, all South Africans. This is very difficult and trying times for all of us. We are fighting, obviously, a pandemic that we have never seen in our lifetime. And we are very grateful, at least, that we can be able to do work, and life is seemingly going back to normality. And if anything, from what we've heard from the president last night, that we'll be moving into level 3, at least by the end of this month. We want to obviously encourage, particularly our motorists, our dealerships, our drivers, to take extra precautions on our roads. This thing is very real, and we need to be able to make sure that we're able to reduce the risk of infection and the risk, obviously, of transmitting this further. Because as it has been said before, the virus does not move. It is us as individuals who move. And when we move with this virus, or potentially we could be able to catch it wherever we move. So we've got to make sure that we take all the precautions, wear our mask when we move into public spaces, wash our hands, and we keep social distancing as much as possible as we can. And I think we will certainly be able to beat this together.
I think we're going to beat it. So there you have it. Mike Mabasa, CEO of NAAMSA. I'm George Mienie, and we will get this industry back on track. Cheers, everybody.